In this lecture, we're going to be looking at one of Ernest Hemingway's most well-known works, The Old Man and the Sea. He wrote this later in his life, and it won the Pulitzer Prize in 1953, and Hemingway was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1954, just a year later. And as I said last time, it's a book about an old Cuban fisherman named Santiago, who, though he's experienced in the trade, has gone 84 days without catching a fish, and people are starting to think of him as unlucky, the other fishermen that he knows. We learn a little bit about his personal life, his personality, from his interactions with the boy who takes care of him, Manolin. He's had a wife who has since died. She was religious. Some of her religious iconography is still up on the walls of his house. He's a big fan of baseball, and he idolizes the baseball player Joe DiMaggio. And at night, he dreams of sailing voyages that he went on when he was young. And overall, he seems to live a pretty beaten-down existence. He doesn't have a lot of money. He doesn't have a lot of food. He sleeps on old newspapers, and he uses his jeans or his trousers, whatever the fabric may be, as a pillow. So this novel chronicles his 3-day journey out into the ocean to break his streak of bad luck and catch a big fish. And again, his experience is evident. He knows how to find out where fish are likely to be by following the birds in the sky and other smaller fish that he spies, flying fish that come up out of the water. He knows how to set his fishing lines in order to increase his chances of catching something big. And he knows how to work with a fish once he's caught one. He catches, eventually, a big marlin. And he knows that if he tries to haul it in right away in his excitement, the fish might break the line by jerking away. So he has to be patient. He has to use wisdom here. He allows the fish to pull him even further out to sea, hoping to wear it down and make it easier to harpoon once it comes to the surface. Meanwhile, while the fish is pulling him out to sea, he survives in kind of a disgusting manner. At least I think it might seem disgusting to us, the readers. Maybe fishermen actually do this in dire straits. But he eats several smaller fishes that he catches raw to keep up his strength. One time he even eats some shrimp that he finds raw. And he's got a little bit of water, so this is just enough to keep him going. And he talks to himself a lot. Not just to himself, but to the individual parts of his body. He encourages his left hand not to cramp, and he tells his head not to get cloudy. And while he's doing this, he even starts to think, maybe I'm not really thinking that clearly. Another thing he does is that he starts to form a relationship with the marlin itself. He develops a tremendous amount of respect for it, calls it his brother, talks to it, and says that even though he knows he has to kill it, he's sorry that it's suffering, and that no one is really worthy to eat it, since it's such a noble creature. So the marlin, his prey, also becomes his companion. Well, finally, on the 3rd day, he's able to harpoon the marlin when it begins to circle the skiff. Santiago is basically delirious at this point. He's had little sleep, little food, little water, but he manages to kill it. And because the marlin is too big to haul into the skiff, he lashes it to the side of the boat and he begins to sail for home. But because there's a big fish lashed to the side of the boat and it's trailing blood, this attracts sharks. And throughout the next night, Santiago he kills a remarkable number of sharks who keep swimming up to the skiff and taking chunks out of the marlin. He kills the first 5 or 6, and he continues to fight off the others, just beating them over the head with anything that he has in the boat. But it's no use. There's too many of them. And by the time that he gets back to land, all that's left of the marlin is its head and its skeleton. And there's a great swelling of pity for Santiago. All the fishermen on the beach say that the skeleton is the biggest that they've ever seen. Manolin, his young friend, is very upset, crying for him, that he went through all this trouble for nothing. But Santiago is so exhausted that he just goes home right away and he goes to sleep. He falls down a couple times getting home. His body is so worn out. And the novel ends on that note. He's continuing to dream of the voyages in his early years. He seems to be right back at the beginning, almost. One thing we can think about when we read this story is what sort of moral or lesson Hemingway is trying to teach us. And I think that there are a couple, and there are probably many more than we can get to here in this lecture. We could look at it almost as another sort of Great Gatsby. Instead of chasing the green light, Santiago is chasing the marlin, and when he finally attains it, it all falls apart in the end. Like Gatsby's, Santiago's dream is elusive. He has trouble maintaining a hold of it. But there's a strong emphasis in this novel on endurance and on hope. On the first or second page even, we read that everything about Santiago is old except for his eyes, which have an undefeated look about them. Now, near the end of the novel, after the sharks have ripped up the marlin, Santiago says this aloud. He says, "It was too good to last," he thought. "I wish it had been a dream now, and that I had never hooked the fish and was alone in bed on the newspapers. But man is not made for defeat," he said. "A man can be destroyed, but not defeated." So, a man can be destroyed, but not defeated. Hemingway hits on this note time and time again in the novel. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be human? Well, according to this definition, it means never giving up. It means always moving forward. Even when you're beaten, like Santiago is beaten here, you can't quit, but because it's only when you quit that you're actually defeated. And so from the very beginning of the novel, we get that hint with that word defeated, that Santiago, he has this look in his eyes that he's never been defeated. There are several times where he feels like he's at the end of his strength, but he always presses forward just a little bit more. Earlier, thinking of the marlin, we read this. "I'll kill him, though," he said, "in all his greatness and his glory. Although it is unjust," he thought, "but I will show him what a man can do and what a man endures." "I told the boy I was a strange old man," he said. "Now is when I must prove it." The 1,000 times that he had proved it meant nothing. Now he was proving it again. Each time was a new time, and he never thought about the past when he was doing it. So, this has become about more than just fishing for sustenance, clearly, fishing for a paycheck. It's about proving himself in some way. Even though, as the story suggests, he's already done so 1,000 times, and no one is even really challenging him to. But to him, those 1,000 times mean nothing. He has to prove it again. He has to show the fish what a man can do and what a man endures. Another way of looking at the novel is we could read it as a struggle between man and nature. There's an interesting comment about the sea and the names that people have for her. We read, "He always thought of the sea as La Mar, which is what people call her in Spanish when they love her. Sometimes those who love her say bad things of her, but they are always said as though she were a woman. Some of the younger fishermen who used buoys as floats for their lines and had motorboats when the shark livers had brought much money, spoke of her as El Mar, which is masculine. They spoke of her as a contestant or a place or even an enemy. But the old man always thought of her as feminine and as something that gave or withheld great favors, and if she did wild or wicked things, it was because she could not help them. The moon affects her as it does a woman," he thought. So, El Mar or La Mar, is it a man or a woman? Is it a friend or an enemy? In either case, the sea itself is a character in this story, just as active in the plot as the old man is. Not only is there the cold at night, the heat in the day, and all of the wildlife that Santiago encounters, but there's always the real chance, even though we don't see it played out, but it is hinted at, that the weather might turn bad, and then the sea will become a real monster. And I think that this contrasts Hemingway with some of the other authors that we've read this year. To Willa Cather, Sarah Jewett, and Nathaniel Hawthorne, nature was a refuge and a friend. It was refreshing, all-consuming, and the characters who were in tune with it, remember, tended to benefit, while those opposed to it brought all sorts of problems on themselves, or at the very least, they were antagonists in the story. But here, nature is seen as, not to Santiago at least so much as an enemy, but as an opponent at least. And it's on this level that the novel has sometimes been read as an allegory. Santiago comes to represent mankind in the abstract and the way that we struggle with, live with, and sometimes overcome the natural forces around us so that we can take care of ourselves and take care of our loved ones. On that note, I know that I compared this novel to Moby Dick last week, Herman Melville's novel. But I think that there's a key difference in the attitude of Captain Ahab from Moby Dick and Santiago's attitude here. Captain Ahab is described to us as a romantic anti-hero, someone who's set apart or different from the normal range of humanity. He's half mad, driven to hunt down the white whale out of revenge and out of hatred. This makes for good storytelling, but it's not really relatable to us, the readers, or at least it shouldn't be, hopefully. Santiago, on the other hand, could be any of us. At least I think that's what Hemingway wants us to think when we read about him. This is just a guy who likes baseball, who's trying to make a living, who's down on his luck. Very relatable stuff. And he stands as more representative of the everyman in an allegory than Captain Ahab could do. When we meet next, we'll discuss how the novel has sometimes been seen as a religious allegory, which I think is an interesting idea, but that's something that I'm going to want to get your thoughts on as well. So that will be all for this lecture, and I'll see you in class.